St. Louis Blues are the hottest team in the NHL as they make a push for the playoffs. The Edmonton Oilers are struggling a bit, but Leon Draisaitl hits a big milestone, and the New York Rangers are fighting for their playoff lives. We'll have that and a whole lot more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blues, Haley Taylor Simon. And Haley, great time to be a Blues fan. They have found their stride on this great winning streak. What has been the biggest difference for this Blues team during the streak?
So I'm happy to be here with the 15-2-2 Blues post-break. And I think the one thing that the Blues have really strived off of since coming back from the break is a sense of it's all or nothing. Doug Armstrong made it very clear that he was going to stand pat post the trade deadline, which meant that he believed that this team, despite the fact that people say, oh, they don't have enough talent, that they could still be a playoff contending team. And what we're seeing is what I saw this entire time with the Blues. We're seeing Jordan Binnington and Joel Hofer outstanding in net. We're seeing the excellence from Dylan Holloway. We're seeing the amazing leadership from Robert Thomas, Braden Shen. And most importantly, what we're seeing is a team of underdogs. Everybody counted out the Blues. They all said they don't have enough talent, they're not good enough, and this team is playing with heart. And something that a lot of teams in the NHL are not doing in this time of year, where they're playing, I guess you can say, more sporadically, whereas the Blues are playing with passion.
Do you think that vote of confidence from management had an impact on this streak?
I would like to think yes. I think at the end of the day, when you've already missed 2 consecutive seasons without making a playoff appearance, that does take a toll on you. And a lot of people tend to forget that last season, the Blues also stood pat and they didn't do anything. And they ended up finishing to be the best, worst team in the NHL. So they were right there on the cusp of going into the playoffs. But this year, they decided to at least make the fight start a little bit earlier than they did last season, just due to the fact that this was the same St. Louis Blues team that couldn't even put together a winning streak until a couple months ago. So I feel like there's just been a lot of motivation from the guys. Hey, we don't want to end this season without going to the playoffs.
How important was participating in Four Nations and playing well in Four Nations for Jordan Binnington and his confidence?
It was huge. Binnington, and I said this the entire season on Locked On Blues, he had a defense in front of him besides like Colton Parayko that wasn't really to the caliber that you would expect to have in front of you as one of the best goalies in the league. And I think that playing for Team Canada and getting that win for Jordan Binnington, playing all of the games, was huge for his confidence level. I mean, this was the same kid, I say kid, but this was the same guy that played his rookie season and got his team the cup. So some of the best hockey that you see from Jordan Binnington is in those intense moments. And in the Four Nations face-off, I know a lot of people were critical of how Binnington played in the first couple of games, but during that final game against Team USA, it was some of the best hockey we saw from Binnington. And it just so happened that it was in the lovely TD Garden where the Blues got their first Stanley Cup.
Yeah, little poetic justice there.
It was.
Talk to me about Dylan Holloway. I mean, he may not get a lot of attention nationally, but he really does seem to be having a huge impact on the Blues right now.
Hollywood Holloway. I mean, there is so much to say about him. Nobody expected him coming into the season, and I'm talking more so the Edmonton fans, to break out as much as he's had. Everybody said at most maybe he would have 18 points, 20 points, and he's exceeded that already. Holloway also has managed to get a point per game and just continues on this incredible point streak. But he is a top 6 forward. And I feel like on Edmonton, he was never going to get that chance to be a top 6 forward just due to all the veteran talents that they had. And I understand why. However, when you take a young player like Dylan Holloway, who is still developing, and you're putting him on that second line, you're allowing him the opportunity to really exceed. And I am seeing somebody that's going to be a star in the NHL. I really thought it was going to be Robert Thomas. I did. That was going to be the biggest star of the Blues. I think it's going to be Dylan Holloway.
And as far as using those offer sheets, that seems to have paid off quite well, what they did over the offseason.
Thank you, Edmonton, for not matching it, for not even trying. I understand, that the Blues were paying a bit much for Philip Broberg, and I will still stand by that. It was a little bit too much. However, it's really worked out. I mean, Broberg is such a great two-way defenseman. I feel like, and I said this on Locked On Blues, actually, I've been trolling the Edmonton fans because they're so delusional sometimes, with all due respect, in that they said, oh, well, Dylan Holloway, he's not that great. He wouldn't play the same way that he does here in St. Louis on Edmonton. And I have to disagree with that. I think that with the Edmonton Oilers, you have a team that is relatively older. They're the oldest team in the NHL. They have a lot of talented players. I'm not going to disrespect that. However, these were two players that you got in the first round of the draft throughout 2019 and 2020. And you were kind of like planning on them being the future of your team. And another team comes in with a very attractive offer sheet, and you don't match it for at least one of them. I feel like that was a huge mistake on the organization of the Oilers, but a win for the Blues. And it just goes to show Doug Armstrong only has a couple more seasons left being GM before Alexander Steen takes over. And he is showing why he is the longest tenured GM in Blues history due to putting out an offer sheet, not just one, but two offer sheets. And both of those guys have panned out quite well.
The penalty kill has been an issue for most of the season. They're ranked near the bottom of the league. Can they improve it, and why is it struggling so much?
That's a great question, and I'm just going to say no. I think it is what it is at this point. The Blues, they've struggled with special teams, not even just this season, but last season, and it's just one of those things where you have to really hope that the guys play smart and don't draw any penalties. However, I still feel like the defense, and as much as I'm happy about the winning, the defense will always be an issue with this team, especially with Colton Parayko out. Now, he has been at skates, which is a really good sign because, again, they said about 6 weeks. So the fact that he's taking the ice already within like 3 weeks is a good sign. However, that's where the Blues do struggle in. So, again, they just cannot draw any penalties.
What is your biggest concern? Right now, the Blues have a bit of a cushion, about 6 points, but Vancouver has a couple of games in hand. What is your biggest concern the rest of the way for this team?
My concern is the consistency. I think having a 9-game win streak is phenomenal, something that I did not expect out of the Blues. However, in the same time, the Blues, they do have a bit of a cushion. But again, we've talked about the Flames and the Canucks, and they do have a couple games in hand. So for me, that is my concern. It's not necessarily the fact I know the Blues are going to end up losing a game. Well, and I'm not trying to, say that. However, it's going to be impossible to really win out when you're going to be playing teams like the Oilers and some other good competitive hockey teams. However, it's the fact is if the Flames get hot, if the Canucks get hot, who knows what can happen? Before the season, Seth, who does Locked On Wild, and I, we both said that the 2 wild card spots would be taken by Central Division teams. And right now that's the case. But for the Blues, it's to get into that wild card one. They need a little bit more of a cushion before the season comes to an end. That is my goal.
And right now, it would seem like nobody would want to play the Blues in the playoffs the way they've been playing lately. Do you think this team can stay hot enough to go on a playoff run?
I sure hope so. That would be the goal. My concern is that while the Blues, and I have to remind everybody that there is still Stanley Cup champions on the St. Louis Blues. And this was a team, people say it's a lot like 2019 where they were the worst team in the NHL at January, right? And then they became Cup champions. But that team had some more veteran presence. And I'm not disregarding Cam Fowler, but I believe it's been like 7 years since Fowler was in the playoffs. And again, Ryan Suter, I mean, he's been all around the Central Division. But I think when it comes to the team in 2019, you had guys like Pat Maroon, obviously, who played a really big role, and O'Reilly. So I think that is a little bit different. However, I think with the momentum that these guys have, that's when you expect a guy like a Robert Thomas to step up, or Jordan Binnington, because they have been there, Braden Shen even.
All right. Well, it's going to be an exciting finish to the season. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Haley, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yep. So if you want to watch Locked On Blues here on YouTube, you can just go to Locked On Blues. If you want to go to Twitter, I've been live tweeting now. That's been a new thing. And I feel like a lot of people have been enjoying my rants during the game. So check that out on Locked On Blues on Twitter. Or if you want my own personal Twitter account, just go to Haley T. Simon.
All right. Haley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is so simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long as we head toward the Final Four. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Check it out today. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers. And Nick, let's start with this. How important was it for the Oilers to win over the weekend against Calgary? Big rivalry game, but you didn't want to go 3 straight without a win. You needed to get back on the winning track.
And that's really been the story of the last month. They've been solidly in a playoff spot since mid-December, and not really a question of if they're going to fall out of that playoff spot, though the Blues have been storming back and got into the mix, and it's definitely made me a little worried about the Oilers falling into a wild card spot. But when they've been locked into a playoff spot for a while now, and the goal for me over the last month or so has been, can they start to string together good hockey game after game? You're not going to win every game, but can you walk away feeling okay about how the games are going, that they're building something heading in the right direction? You don't want to need to turn it on that first playoff game and expect everything to line up. I mean, this is a team that's going to try and drop Evander Kane and Trent Frederick into their top 9 at some point over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Kane probably not till the playoffs, but Frederick supposedly in the next week or so. And to get them where they want to go, they're going to need everything to line up. And right now, this season, it's been a lot of stops and starts. It's been up and down. And over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, it's been injuries. It's been the goaltending as being especially bad. So they've really needed just something to kind of cauterize the wound, if you will, over the last week. And winning a rivalry game against a Flames team that's very much in the playoff mix, not the most comforting way to win a game, but you won, and that's what matters.
Talk to me about the injuries. I know they've been hitting hard. What are the latest updates? Who is out and how soon may they be back?
So Leon came back on Saturday, had the pair. That made a huge difference. And without him, that lineup was, without him, McDavid, and Ekholm, who all didn't play on Thursday, that was a really rough lineup. Skinner got hurt in that game as well, got concussed in that game, left early, and they were down to Pickard and Olivier Rodrigue, who doesn't have NHL experience. So it's been a real mash unit over the last week and a half, just as bare bones a lineup as you can. A lot of minutes for guys who haven't played a whole lot. And it's interesting because earlier in the week, last week, Chris Knobloch had said, well, we have a lot of guys here who've played a lot more minutes in their careers. Because you look at the minutes allocation, the Oilers have a very top-heavy minutes allocation where once you get past their 5 best players, you're talking 13, 14 minutes a night for a lot of those guys, and even lower than that the further you go down in the lineup. And you're talking about, 35-year-old Adam Henrique having to bump up to 16, 17 minutes a night from 14. And it's a very difficult and fine line to walk where you want to ride your best players. But I've definitely been a little weary of that, how aggressively they've ridden their top players this year, because you still got to get to the playoffs, and then you got to last the entire playoffs.
Is there enough depth in this lineup to make that long playoff run?
And that's really the defining question, because on paper, yes, but in practice, it hasn't lined up the way the Oilers, I think, thought it would. I've been talking about this a lot over the last 2 weeks with the Blues resurgence. I really am curious what the Oilers' original plan was because they signed Skinner and Arvidsson the first day of free agency. Holloway and Broberg were both RFAs they didn't have arbitration rights, but they were able to take the offer sheets from the Blues. Did the Oilers just think they were going to get them on the minimum, the tender to keep their rights and try and drop even more? Because they've also had a logjam. If you go and look when everyone's healthy, they've been carrying like 14 or 15 forwards most of the season. And it's good. You have competition, bottom half of your lineup. Guys have to play better to stay in the lineup. But at the same time, you have a lot of guys fighting for spots that aren't really there. And you're going to drop 2 more guys into this mix in the next week or so as well. That's something that needs to be considered. I mean, Jeff Skinner has I think the 5th or 6th most goals on the team, and he's been healthy scratched a bunch this year, which is crazy to me on a team that needs goal scoring, which is crazy to say about a team with the leading goal scorer in the entire league and Connor McDavid, that they're not scoring enough.
You mentioned the goal scoring. Leon Draisaitl, first player to 50, now has 51 goals. What did this milestone mean for him, and how critical is having he and McDavid healthy and at their best to start the playoffs?
So for me, it's more about narrative than anything. Leon himself would tell you it doesn't really matter. The stats don't matter. Him and McDavid are kind of at the point in their careers where the individual accolades are nice. You think about the Chalamet speech at the Academy Awards about this. This isn't proof, but this is a little more fuel. This is a little more motivation. And I think that's the way great players think about these things. Draisaitl's up there. He's got the same amount of goals as Austin Matthews over the last 5 years. But when I think of Draisaitl, I still think of him as more of a playmaker than a goal scorer, which again is kind of crazy and oxymoronic. But when you watch him, when he's at his most comfortable, it is facilitating. I saw highlights from the cup final the other day that were just floating around on Instagram in game 6, and he threw a saucer pass off a backhand 25 feet away to Fogle on the tape, and Fogle was already behind Bobrovsky. How good of a pass it was. And for Draisaitl, I think it's more about the narrative and where he fits when we talk about the players of this era, because you put McDavid, Matthews, McKinnon, the guys who've won hearts. He has a heart, but a lot of people look at that one from 2020 a little weary because McDavid was injured. Only 60 some odd games Draisaitl played that year. But as far as their importance, it absolutely imperative. This team cannot do anything in the playoffs if those two and Evan Bouchard are not all playing at a really high level. It is an essential component to Oilers' success that all 3 of those guys are playing and playing well, not just good. They need to all be actively good if the Oilers are going to win anything this year.
Is the goaltending good enough to make another long playoff run and possibly win a cup this year?
I tell myself yes. I don't really believe it. I knock on my desk a lot anytime I talk about the Oilers goaltending. It's really volatile. That's what I would describe it as. And Skinner's kind of at a point where he's a year away from unrestricted free agency. He has the one good playoff run to his belt that he did get pulled for 2 games from in the middle of. And that reset did work for him, and it realigned him well. He outplayed Ottinger in the conference final. And I don't think he was a problem in the cup final against the Panthers. But if you ask me right now, no, I don't think the goaltending is good enough. And I think it's fair to say the way this roster is built, the goaltending doesn't even need to be good. It just doesn't need to be horrendous. Like, they can get away with bad. Just it can't be abysmal. And that's kind of been the problem over the last month. You go and look at some of these box scores. You've got 10 Skinner starts that are like 870 save percentage or worse. And the Oilers don't ask him to do a lot. 23, 24 saves a night is not an unrealistic ask for an average NHL goalie, which Skinner, when he's right, is. He's a little bit above average.
The probability is that the Oilers will face the Kings for the 4th straight year in the playoffs. Number one, is this a good thing or a bad thing from an Oilers perspective? And then how important is it to get home ice advantage because the Kings have been so good at home all season long?
So everything logic-wise would tell you the Oilers are a better team. They should be able to beat the Kings. But everything in me as a sports fan knows that you don't get to beat the same team over and over and over again. Eventually, every dog has their day. Ohio State kept beating Michigan over and over and over again. And then eventually Michigan got their lick back. And that's kind of how sports work. I mean, this Kings team, again, it's very reminiscent of the last few. It's not that flashy. They play really good defense. They play really good possession hockey. They control the center of the ice really well and force you to work hard for offense, something the Oilers in particular have struggled with this year more so than years past. They really miss the speed of Dylan Holloway and Warren Fogle, who the Fogle for Arvidsson swap is a really interesting thought exercise where you compare that Fogle on paper doesn't have the track record that Arvidsson does, but Fogel's unequivocally been a better player this year on a team playing a smaller role than he did in Edmonton. But as far as home ice, I try not to get too caught up in things like that, the regular season splits, because last year the Oilers had a terrible record against winning teams, teams that were over 500 when they played them, and they went to Game 7 of the Cup final. So I try not to read too much into those types of circumstantial and environmental stats. But at the same time, like I said, I am worried. I don't think you get to keep beating the same team over and over again.
All right. Well, it's going to be a fantastic finish to the season and hopefully a long playoff run for the Oilers. Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Locked On Oilers is available on all the major podcasting platforms, over on YouTube as well. I have to figure out what we're going to talk about on Monday's show. And after that, on social, just at Nick Zararis, Nick, Zararis on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
All right, Nick, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gil.
It's great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, John Chick. And John, Rangers finish up their West Coast swing with mixed results. What is it with this team as they look to find some consistency?
You know, they just, in some ways, I feel like a team is essentially just the sum of all of its parts. And when you've got a team here, and we're now 74 games into the season, if you're a fan of the New York Rangers, and when you have a team where every single player has regressed and or given you less or far less than what you expected, this is what the results are going to be. I mean, there's very few players on this team that I think are playing better this season than they did last season. Will Cooley is one of them. And unironically, Matt Rempe is another, although he did just suffer an injury and is out of the lineup. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line, it's kind of a multitude of things where they seem to have issues with their starts to games. They seem to have issues with their finishes to the games. They take a lot of bad penalties. The power play has just fallen off of a cliff. It's in a 2 for 35 slide, and it's been every bit as bad as those numbers would suggest. It's not like they're getting unlucky or anything like that. So, I mean, I don't know, man. It's just kind of one thing after the next, and it's just been a complete 180 this year compared to last year in terms of just how they play and just kind of the fight, the effort that they put forward. The effort has been very inconsistent from one game to the next. So kind of a minor miracle that they're still in it at all, but 8 games left. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the logical follow-up question is why? Who's to blame? How did we get to a point where a team that won the President's Trophy a year ago, that started the season with mostly the same personnel, ends up struggling for a playoff spot?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of blame to go around. I think you can look anywhere from the players to the coaching staff to Chris Drury, a general manager. I feel like Drury in the offseason and then even in the start of the regular season, you know, he got rid of Barclay Goodrow and Jacob Trouba. And on one hand, he did what he felt like he had to do. And I don't really blame him for either one of those moves. I think either of them could have been handled with a little bit more of a human touch other than just kind of treating them like, you know, yesterday's news and just kind of forcing them out the door. But by that same token, I feel like a lot of players on this Rangers, guys that should know better, guys that are supposed to be the leaders of this team, took it way too personally. I mean, this is the NHL, man. And there's moves that have to be made. And they're not always fun. They're not always comfortable. And sometimes you do have to say goodbye to, you know, a popular member of your locker room, a veteran player, whatever it might be. And I feel like the players kind of sulked about that for a while. And, you know, they went through that miserable stretch in November and December where they were 4-15, and they've basically been playing catch up ever since. And they've been up and down since then. And I don't know, man, you know, the effort, it just kind of comes and goes with this team. And as far as Peter Laviolette goes, kind of some strange lineup decisions, you know, and strange time on the ice allotments to some of these players. But, you know, we'll see how it goes going forward. My biggest hope with this team, I think, is that Igor Shesterkin is still there. He's played well recently. And if they are going to somehow fight their way in and navigate what is a difficult schedule down the home stretch here, he's going to have to be one of the guys leading the way.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like on paper, if the Rangers do get in, you've got the goaltending, you've got playoff experience up and down this roster. If they get hot at the right time, it seems like they could give anybody a hard time, and it also seems like they could easily get swept out.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not like overly optimistic though, even if they do somehow squeeze in there, because this team has just had so many bad habits formed throughout this entire season. I mentioned the effort not too long ago. If they do get in, you got to figure they're up against the Caps, because I got to figure the Caps are going to be first in the Eastern Conference. If the Rangers get in, they'll be the second wild card team. So there's your matchup. And the Caps have just been a much better team than the Rangers in just about every facet for the entire season. So, I'm thankful that at least they have a chance, and at least we're not at the point where I'm sitting here doing meaningless games. For other Locked On hosts, they're not so lucky. Some of their teams have been kind of dead and buried in the standings for a long time. At least the Rangers are in it. But, man, just a colossal disappointment of a season. Never would have thought that this is where we would be after what happened last year. I mean, maybe not back-to-back President's trophies, but, man, I mean, they were at least going to be in the mix. They were going to be comfortably in a playoff spot, and as we see, that's just not reality this season. Like I said, pretty much everybody has taken a step back, and here we are.
How do you think the team handles this situation in the offseason if they barely get in or if they miss? Who takes the fall, if anybody?
Yeah, I think the only way that they won't aggressively retool this team, and the only way that Peter Laviolette can possibly save his job, is if this team was to somehow barely squeak in and then win at least a round or two. Because if they just make the playoffs but lose in 4 or 5 games in the first round, that's not really going to change anything as far as the big picture here. So the chances of that, based on what I've seen this season, what I just described, are very, very slim. And I think that once this season ends, you probably will see the Rangers go in a different direction as far as the head coach is concerned, because he just hasn't had any answers this season. There's been too many third period collapses. There have been too many no-shows. And while I do put the blame for that on the players more so than I put it on Peter Laviolette, at some point, I mean, that's the coach's job, man. You got to have these guys ready to go. They got to be out there, playing with some urgency, especially now when in theory they're fighting for a playoff spot. So yeah, man, if they miss it or they go out early, Peter Laviolette's probably going to be gone. As far as Drury, I mean, I feel like that one could go either way. I do feel like he's got a little bit more rope than Peter Laviolette. But even if they stick with Drury, his seat is going to be getting hot too, because he'll be hiring his third coach in the last 4 seasons. We had the last year of Gallant and Laviolette for 2 years, and then whoever else comes in here next. So I can't imagine he's got a whole lot of rope left, but I feel like Drury is kind of sold Dolan and whoever it might be on this idea that they can retool this roster aggressively and not have to go full on tear down rebuild. And we've seen them already take some steps in doing that, acquiring JT Miller and several other players as well. So we'll see how it goes, but I feel like Laviolette probably is not back next year. I think Drury probably will be, though.
Give me some reasons for hope. We know Shesterkin will have to step up down the stretch. Who else needs to lead this team if they're going to make a playoff run?
Well, one guy who I think is already doing it is Artemi Panarin. I got done talking about him on the episode that I recorded a little bit earlier today here. He closed out the month of March with 10 goals and 10 assists in just 15 games. Absolutely on fire. And in a season where very few veterans have stepped up in any kind of a meaningful way, he has. And he's done it at a time where they need him more than ever. I mean, every game is just so big when your team is a fringe playoff team. And it's such a unique situation because there's basically 5 teams for one spot at this point. So, man, you got to just keep winning and winning and winning. And Artemi Panarin is bringing it every single night. JT Miller, too, ever since the trade. Would love to see more from guys like Chris Kreider, Alexi Lafreniere, Mika Zibanejad, but based on what we've seen from those 3 players for the majority of the season, I'm not exactly holding my breath. Mika at least got hot for a little while there after the trade for JT Miller, but very, very disappointing season for the 3 of them for sure.
Any injured players who may be back for the last 8 games or part of them?
Not really. I mean, Matt Rempe just had the injury. I believe he's currently week to week. I don't think there's anybody that's coming back all that soon, but they're just have to roll with what they have. They will still have some interesting lineup decisions to make. There's kind of a revolving door as far as the last defenseman and who's the healthy scratch. Carson Soucy, acquired at the deadline, was actually a healthy scratch for, I believe it was 3 games in a row there. And recently, Vakanainen had been out of the lineup, and now it's Zach Jones. So they've got some options, but there's no guy that's going to come in and make a massive difference at this point in the season. They are what they are. They have the players that they have. One guy I will say that I'm impressed with him recently is Brandon Hoffman, and they're starting to use him with Artemi Panarin and Vincent Trocheck. He's willing to go to the net, use his physicality, and that's been a lot of fun. It's not really showing up on the score sheet all that much recently, but he's giving them some snarl that they desperately need.
All right. Well, it's going to be an interesting stretch drive for sure. John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, you can find Locked On Rangers there too. We are on YouTube, and you can find me on social media at jchick17.
All right, John, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
All right, thanks, Gil. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank my guests, Haley Taylor-Simon of Locked On Blues, Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers, and John Chick of Locked On New York Rangers for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. We're here every day, Monday through Saturday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the NHL and the world of women's hockey on Saturday. So make sure you join us for that. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.